bunch of you. This is really super. It's like old home week. So, so if I say anything that's repetitive, you've heard it before, you can nod off. So, I'm going to put a couple of ideas out there that you may or may not agree with. I love it when you don't agree with me, so that I invite warmly. I am going to say that I know that you have talked a little bit about delinking. Is that right? You know a little bit about delinking, or is it just you, that knows about delinking?
Pretty much.
Does everybody know? Oh, dang. Well, we don't have time to go there. That's way too long. Because you heard this. Like, it took 2 hours to talk about this last week. Okay, we can't talk about delinking. Do you know something about waivers?
A bit.
Something?
Not too much.
Okay, let's just like.
We've been looking at child, you know, a lot of prevention.
Right.
A lot of prevention stuff.
Okay. So, okay. Then I'll just make it simple.
Right.
You guys have been talking a lot about prevention. Tons of energy in the child welfare community right now. It's around taking all of those dollars that we currently spend in this child welfare system, $5 billion-ish, and moving them out of the industry of foster care and moving them into prevention. Okay, so you know, you've been talking about prevention, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for prevention, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for shifting the dollars, of the money flow, and to follow our philosophy. Our philosophy is about family preservation, our philosophy is about supporting families, our philosophy is about not separating children from families, so the dollar should flow to support our principles, is the notion. So we need to use waivers or delinking or whatever strategy to move dollars out of that foster care industry and move it into prevention. And as we develop this narrative, we, the advocacy community, have developed this narrative. What's kind of come along with the narrative is, and by the way, foster care is a terrible place for kids. Who would want to be there? It's terrible for kids. And another reason why we should do prevention. Our principles suggest kids should stay with their families. Who could argue with that? And foster care is a terrible thing, so let's pull the money out of foster care, keep the kids out of foster care, and let's move our money into prevention. And I'm just going to say a couple of things about that. First is, I think foster care gets a really bad rap. Foster care is actually pretty darn bad in the United States. And the evidence suggests that it's probably better than the alternative. So when you look at the studies that have been conducted, and they're limited, of course, because we can't do randomized controlled clinical trials where we randomly assign maltreated kids, oh, flip of the coin, you guys get to go to foster care, you guys get to stay home. Nobody's ever going to do that, thank God, those unethical researchers out there. We don't do that. So the best we can do is we have various quasi-experimental designs. We have, now we're using things like propensity score matching. There are now a lot of really sophisticated statistical techniques where we can try to match youth who had sort of like profiles and like circumstances, and then follow the ones who did make it into child welfare systems and those who didn't. The data suggests that even though foster care is probably a lousy place for a lot of kids, on average, it's a pretty protective place for kids. Kids are less likely to die. I mean, kind of doesn't get any more stark than that. You take children who've been maltreated and you leave them with their parents, and they're more likely to die than if they're in foster care. They're less likely to experience teen pregnancy. They're less likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. Those are kind of hard outcomes, right? So I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, foster care is a great deal, we should send a lot of kids there by any stretch of the imagination. But it's interesting that the narrative has been, and our enthusiasm, to try to find the political will and those political champions who are going to champion our cause for prevention, that the way to do that was that we had to demonize foster care to get there. To get the political enthusiasm for the front end, we had to figure out a way to demonize the back end. And all I'm saying is that I think that by demonizing the back end, what we do is a tremendous disservice to a few kids who probably need to be there, right? And of course, the big question is making sure that we put the kids there who need to be there and don't ever make a mistake by sending kids there when they don't need to be there. Absolutely. So I'm going to say that foster care works, even though there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it has highly variable quality. It's probably better than the alternative, and it could be a lot better. I'm also going to suggest that foster care is terribly underfunded. This $5 billion thing that we call the child welfare system, that we're trying to dismantle so we can move all those monies into prevention, raises the question, well, what happens to the children who have to stay in this thing that we call And right now, that system is dramatically underfunded. So what do we pay foster parents in this country? We pay them woefully little, okay? We pay them in California about $500 per child per month, which doesn't pay the bills, guys. It doesn't pay the bills. And there's every evidence from every research study that's been done to suggest that we underpay our foster parents at a minimum by 30% and sometimes by 100%, given the cost of what it takes to raise a child in the United States in a low-income family. In a low-income family. So the studies compare what does it take to raise a child in a low-income family, and then it looks at a foster care payment and says we still don't pay them enough to get by, to be in the same circumstances as our lowest-income kids in the United States. And I kind of think we could do a little bit better than that, you know. I was in Norway last year, where I was working with colleagues related to foster care. I was asking them a little bit about the foster care system, and you know, it was just sort of mind-boggling, right? Who do they target to be foster parents? You. They target you to be foster parents. Well, you can tell them all about it. Avon is here. He can tell you all about it, right? So the targeting is professionals, and you know, if you're a professional, and let's say a professional teacher, nurse, social worker, and you decide that you're going to become a foster parent, then you bring that child into your home, and those child welfare workers say, Deirdre, aren't you going to need a little bit of time to take care of that child and get that child acclimated to your family? Well, yes, I would like a little time. Let's work it out with your employer where you can take 6 months off from your employment, and we'll just pay you your wage and take care of that child. We don't do it that way in the United States. There's a county in Colorado where some years ago they were trying to improve the quality of foster care, and they did make enormous investments in their foster parents, and they paid them a real wage. And this was, I mean, this really gives you history. The foster parents wore pagers. I mean, do you guys even know what a pager is? That was really a long time ago. But anyway, they would wear pagers because if a child came into foster care in that county, all the foster parents wanted to be the first one to know that there was a child available in foster care that could come to their home, and they wanted to say, me first, I'm a really good match, assess me, figure out if I'm the right person for this particular child, whether I'm the right family, whether I can provide the right kind of home environment. Why? Because they were really well trained, they were really well supported, they had social workers on call 24/7 who were available to them when they were in crisis, and they paid them a professional wage. And so they were ready and eager and enthusiastic, and there was a better matching process. So if Johnny came in and Johnny had special considerations, they could choose from a bunch of foster parents to decide where Johnny's going to live, not, oh God, is there a bed? Is there a bed? We don't even talk about kids, we do have beds. And that's just really a abomination. So, foster care needs dollars. It needs political will, and it needs champions. It's hard to be a foster care champion if you're in politics because you risk your political career if you decide to be a champion for foster children. It's easy to be a champion for prevention because it's so feel good. Oh, we love prevention, it feels so good. But it's really hard to be a champion for foster care because kids die in the system. They die because social workers make dumb mistakes. Administrators make dumb mistakes, systems are overburdened, and kids get hurt, and then those politicians sort of lose all that great goodwill that they had. So it's very, very dangerous to be a politician and to care about kids in foster care. It's also a really interesting blame culture. You know, when you have people who commit a crime and then we release them and they go into the community, except for those heinous crimes that maybe a criminal might commit, everything except for a heinous crime, nobody says, oh my God, those police, what horrible police, what terrible decision making for sending those criminals back into the world again. We say, oh, criminals commit new offenses, don't they? That's kind of past behavior, predicts future behavior. Gee, I wish that wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't the police officer's fault that the criminal committed another offense. But in social work, when we don't deal particularly punitively with parents, and we say we think things have changed and we want you to reunify with your child and we're going to give this our best shot, and when parents sometimes hurt their kids again, we blame social workers for it. So the culture of blame is very different in social work and in child welfare than it is, I think, in any other profession. So there isn't a lot of political will to sort of manage the media response to those high-profile events. So it's kind of hard to be a political champion for foster care. Foster care also needs innovation. You know, I had a woman, I don't know how often you get these emails. I never do. I got this email 2 weeks ago from this woman. I'm very rich and I have about $5 million in money. I was like, oh my God, it's a scam. What is this? It's like some sort of, you know, those scams you get? It wasn't. It was real. And I have this $5 million and I'd like to give it to something in child welfare. Could you call me and consult on how I should spend my money? Well, she's not spending it on our school. Dang, she's really tried. But what she's really interested in is spending it on foster care. But she really wants to know who are the local agencies doing real innovative work around foster care. She says, I've been looking around and I see all these neat programs that help families when they're not in foster care. But what about foster care? Who's doing something different, innovative, creative in foster care? And I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to say to her because I can't find them. You know, there isn't any political will for it. There isn't any social work will for it. There isn't any stomach for doing innovative, interesting, trying it differently. There's hardly any research on foster care, hardly any at all. That's not where the dollars are. The dollars are on the prevention side, right? So we need more. And imagine if we actually had a research infrastructure that told us how to do good foster care, if we had a training and support infrastructure to do good foster care, if we had good money on the table to help foster parents actually, you know, put food on the table and provide good quality care. Imagine if we're already keeping kids from dying because we put them in foster care. Imagine how much better their lives could be. We could really talk about other developmental outcomes, like, oh, they go to college, and oh, they're happy, and oh, they're well adjusted. But right now, we sort of look at the bottom line in sort of really stark way. And then finally, I think we have this really crazy schizophrenic relationship with foster care. We love it, we hate it. We mostly hate it, and I just told you all the reasons why we hate it. Politicians hate it, nobody likes it, right? Until we want to extend it till age 21, and then we love it. If we love to hate foster care is a terrible place for children. They should never be in foster care. Never. But if they're 18, we gotta figure out a way for them to stay till they're 21 because it's such a good protective place. Okay. Okay. So the narrative, what I'm trying to suggest is the narrative around foster care is this strange schizophrenic narrative, and the media have contributed to the schizophrenic narrative, and instead of sort of figuring out a single narrative, it's this duality. And then, you know, it's terrible if you're younger than 18, it's great if you're over the age of 18. I guess, you know, college is terrible for 3-year-olds too, but yeah, it should be developmentally appropriate. All right, so that's the story in foster care. Finally, just to sort of sum up, that that's the story in foster care. What do we know about prevention? And you've already read some of my work. I think that although since I wrote the book, there have been some innovations in the area of prevention. We have a little bit more of a hint of some programs that might have some effects on preventing maltreatment. But those effects are really, really modest, really, really modest. I think generally the research evidence suggests that prevention of maltreatment is something that's the great golden goblet that we're still trying to grab. We really haven't figured out how to do it yet. Prevention of poor developmental outcomes for kids, we're pretty good at. Strengthening parenting up until the point of maltreatment, we're really pretty good at. We have really good evidence-based programs to help parents learn how to parent their kids better. We have a really good evidence base for that. But we don't know very much about preventing maltreatment. And the interesting thing is, this child welfare system that's funded to serve foster care doesn't like foster care, loves to hate foster care, and wants to divest itself from foster care so that it can put all this money into the prevention basket when we actually don't have much evidence that it does very much good. And more importantly, child welfare also is trying to stretch its boundaries. See, I'm trying to get that visual, right? Gotta avoid. Stretch its boundaries. We kind of don't want to take care of foster kids. We kind of want to do this prevention work to prevent maltreatment with these really super high-risk families, what I'll call high-risk, because they're families with multiple challenges. And then, in addition to that, we kind of want to take on the rest of the world in the field of child welfare and do a bunch of family support good things for a bunch of families who actually aren't even at risk of becoming in our risk pool. So we're a field that's very much adrift right now. We need to figure out where we're going. We need to figure out what direction we're going in. And I think that the role of the media is an interesting one in all of this, because where I see the media playing the role a lot of the time is playing with the stories around foster care. There's a lot of media stories around foster care didn't work. Here's another example. Here's another example of an unhurt child. And I hear a lot of media stories around that narrative. I see not very much, some narrative around preventing maltreatment, I suppose. And then I also see a lot of opportunity. I see a lot of opportunity for developing political will and financial will to develop a new infrastructure to provide good supportive services to families who are not at risk of maltreatment, but who need help learning how to parent their kids better. And that's an important role for the media to play in developing the financial and the political capital that we need to develop an infrastructure that currently doesn't exist to help families who are not high risk, but who are medium and low risk, and who need a lot more help to raise their kids. In the United States, we don't have an infrastructure to help those families at all. And so there's a really important role for the media to play to create that. And that's what we're going to talk about. Okay?
Yeah. Do you want to, I remember when the three of us were talking, you did that wonderful pyramid.
See it, Joe? I do.
Yeah, why don't you
You
just...
draw that pyramid?
Let me move this up.
Those students who were in my class last week saw my pyramid. Okay, here's my pyramid, everybody. Okay, you guys can see my pyramid? Okay, this is all American families, United States, okay? Down here is the vast majority of American families who don't need anything. We all sort of manage. We all manage relatively well. We manage from our parents, from our friends, from our neighbors, from our support network, from our PTA, from our quilting clubs, where'd that come from? From our whatever, right? I like our group, our friends. And we figure out how to parent by just talking to everybody and saying, can you help me out? Give me advice? Can you, right? We don't need government. We don't need formal systems. We don't need a support network that's organized. We just figure it out. I don't know where I am on this. As you move up, this is sort of a series of risks. Parents run into difficulties because they have substance abuse issues themselves. Parents run into difficulties raising their kids because they have mental health issues themselves. Or depression, which affects a very large number of American women in the United States. Parents run into difficulties because maybe they have trouble with their own criminal justice involvement. Parents have difficulties for a whole variety of reasons, having to do with their poverty status, maybe their educational attainment, that sort of thing. As you move up the risk pool, the reason I say up is because there are fewer people in America who have these problems. And those problems compromise their parenting. And so, what we find is that the current child welfare system, which is about that $5 billion mark, is really targeted to the very, very, very tip, where there just aren't very many kids. Just those kids who've been maltreated by their parents. It looks like it's about 6%, maybe 8% of all kids in America. And that's where we target this whole child welfare system, up the tip top of the pyramid, where families have often multiple challenges in multiple domains. It's not just maltreatment, and that's where we spend our dollars. That's where we have a service system. What's important is we have a research infrastructure that suggests we actually know how to do something for those families. Some challenges, some problems, not a bunch of problems. And when we provide services to that group of families, we move them down out of the risk pool into this group of everybody else. So we have the research capacity, we have the knowledge, we have the technology to take who are struggling with their parenting and to move them down into not really having trouble with their parenting. And what we don't have much knowledge about is how to take this group and move them anywhere at all. We just don't have the knowledge yet to figure out how to move them. And the debate in child welfare between prevention and intervention is all like right there. All right there. Trying to move these dollars right there. It's not about moving, it's about the idea that if we just move those dollars, we can take these people and we can move them there. That's the idea. I don't think we have any evidence that we know how to do that. We really don't. And I would love if the United States had a real infrastructure, like many European countries do, to support those families. All we have is stuff to support them. I don't want to take that away and give it to this group when we don't know what the benefits are going to be. I want to create a whole new bunch of cash to do something here, structurally. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's my pitch.
Great. So I think now we're talking about how to get the story out. And I want to really play off of that pyramid and say that, what we've just been told is that there's a lot of evidence, a lot of research about how to help parents, at least parents who are not in that 6 to 8% tip of the pyramid, who are in deep trouble. Parents who are the most have the most multiple problems, possibly prison, history of abuse, extreme trauma, addiction, multiple problems. And so we may not know so much about how to help them, but what you're saying is that there's a great deal of evidence and experience about how to improve parenting for the vast majority of American families. And the question then, always a kind of a question about research and about academia and about policy, is how do you get the word out? So the media, ideally should be functioning as a bridge between the most enlightened, the most advanced public policy and research practices and experiences, and the public. But how do you do that? And so I'm here to just talk a little bit about some ways of doing it. I think that there's a need for us to, reimagine new kinds of beats that we don't even think about. Years ago, when there were a lot of American newspapers, there were also a lot of pages that were called the women's pages, and they would have, recipes, and they would have information for child-raising information for the kind of an idealized American mother, and those pages are gone, but they haven't been replaced with something more up-to-date and more current that would be oriented towards parents, towards active dads, and we know that dads are doing a lot more parenting than ever before in America. We know that there are now far more single mothers than ever before. A huge percentage of kids are being raised in single parent, usually single mother families. So it's no longer the idealized American family, nuclear family, but it's all kinds of different situations. There are all kinds of different cultural and ethnic dynamics that work in the family. And the media just hasn't kind of figured out how to move from the idealized nuclear family to addressing people in a whole different variety of ways to talk about parenting and parenting challenges. So I think that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to pioneer different beats and call them different things. And I see this happening all the time. Like even in the New York Times, you see, and with the extension of blogging out of so many newspapers now on their websites, you see more and more that an individual journalist who has an idea of a beat, a doctor who suddenly wants to write about, doing medicine on the island of Nantucket, all of a sudden she's got a beat at the New York Times, or Daniel Bornstein, who's got this great idea, you introduced me to him, about solutions journalism, and suddenly he's able to have a beat at the opinionator at the New York Times. But there are many, many other opportunities to do this. there aren't a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money doing this, but there are more opportunities now as journalists than ever before to, have your own blog, link to other places, and find your niche, find your audience. There are ways to do that and to be heard. So, whether so maybe you can put what happened to mine? There you go. I put together some just examples, and then we can maybe have some just general discussion. You don't have to write, everything doesn't have to be dry policy.
This is the Mother Jones one?
Go all the way to the top of this document, if you would.
So we're just thinking about how to open our stories up.
My
So this is
email, the
helpful.
email sent me or the Mother Jones website?
That's good right there. So there's a need for a newbie. Children and family, personal life, our kids, dad's page, single mom, different kinds of, of topics, or it could be, Cambodian family life, or, Afghan family life, or there are all kinds of ways that you can begin to slice and dice, and then begin to take research and feed it into palatable stories. One person who's doing this, who I think you should all be aware of, is a woman named Christine Carter, and she's got a blog called Raising Happiness, and she puts it out through Greater Good, which you should all be aware of. It's right here on campus, the Center for Science and the Greater Good. And go ahead and click on that, and go down. And she's just giving lots of information that could be relevant to any parent at any level of education. In this case, it's one. Do you want to go down a little bit more, or here? Just keep scrolling down. About how to talk to kids, and she's spreading the ideas of positive parenting. And she's just breaking it down into very easy to understand, easy to forward and talk about ideas about positive parenting. So the next one on my list was talking about investigative reporting. In this case, this is the Center for Investigative Reporting did an investigation of institutional abuse, child abuse, and put it in the form of a graphic novel. And we can look at a little bit of that. So we want to go through quickly different examples of, because I want to get to narrative journalism. But this started out as an investigative report, then it was turned into a narrative text, and then as the third stage of trying to disseminate the story, they created this graphic. We could just maybe watch 2 minutes of it. Feel free to fast forward.
I could see something wasn't right. When she was 3.5 years old, I had her tested. And sure enough, they said something wasn't right. And they put her in a special school. And she went from special school to special school and then to a group home.
It turned out that Jennifer had severe...
Wrong, I thought she had a tumor, that she was sick. I took her back Sunday afternoon and told the staff I want her tested tomorrow morning, Monday. Then they called me. I was at work, and they said, Jenny is pregnant.
Okay, that's
I mean,
stop
let
right
me
there.
tell you. Oh,
So you get the idea.
I said, what?
And let's, that story, the graphic got tremendous more attention than the original written investigative report ever did. But it went through those stages from research to writing to cartooning. Let's move to the next one. Mother Jones. So this is an interesting article in Mother Jones about how PTSD symptoms can be contagious within a family. And this is narrative journalism. So, there's a whole long article here, probably about 5,000 words. And, the important thing really about about narrative journalism is capturing the lived experience, bringing people in, turning the research about PTSD and Iraqi veterans into a story that people can relate to and that captures them emotionally. In a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit more about the ingredients of narrative journalism and actually how you do that. What's the recipe for writing a narrative? And narratives can be written, at any length, long, short, and medium. This is a pretty long form one, but look at the amount of time that's just being spent on these details. Katie Vines, the first time I meet her, wait a minute. Oh yeah, is in trouble. Not that you know it, to look at her bounding up to the car, blondish bob flying as she sprints from her kindergarten class, nice round face like her daddy's. No one's the wiser till she cheerfully hands her mother a folder from the back seat she's hopped into. It contains notes about the day from her teacher. It says here, Brandon says, her eyes narrowing incredulously, that you spit on someone today. Yes, ma'am, Katie admits, lowering her voice and her eyes guiltily. Katie Vines. Brandon was born here in Alabama, so that's drawled. Why did you do that? Her schoolmate said something mean, maybe. Katie doesn't sound sure or like she remembers exactly. One thing she's positive of. She just made me so mad. Brandon asks Katie to name some of the alternatives. Walk away, get the teacher, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Katie dutifully responds to the prompts. She looks disappointed in herself. Her eyebrows are heavily creased when she shakes her head and says quietly again, I was so mad. Brandon and Katie's teacher have conferenced about Katie's behavior many times. Brandon's not surprised she's picked up overreacting and yelling. You don't have to be at the Vines residence for too long to hear Caleb, who's the Iraqi veteran, hollering from his room, where he sometimes hides for 18, 20 hours at a time, and certainly not if you're there during his nightmares, which Katie is. She just mirrors her dad's behavior, Brandon says. She can't get Katie to stop picking at the sores on her legs, etc. It's a story, it's dialogue, it's you are there in the backseat of this car, but it's also beginning to impart a lot of information. And it's setting it up for some exposition, which is going to be coming, about, that's going to start to get you a lot more data as the piece goes on. So let's move on to the next item. So what goes into writing a narrative? Clay Felker, I run this thing. Should I bring
We've got it? You have the card in your hand or something?
I do actually.
Do you really?
Yeah, I actually brought these.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I don't think these are that useful, but
They're very useful.
Did you get one from Clay?
Yeah.
Back in the
Had
day.
it for years.
So Daniel knew Clay Felker, who founded this, and Clay Felker was known as one of the fathers of Tom Wolfe of the new journalism. And Clay would carry this card, and I'll give you one. And sort of like breaking it down and make it simple, I make it a little more complicated. The elements of literary journalism. As I say, what I found is that people read this and they like it, and then they kind of want to know more. So I put a little more to it. That's up in this paragraph. There was really a lot more to it, but you're pursuing a question. You, the narrator. Why is it called narrative journalist? Because you're narrating a story. You're the narrator. And you're pursuing a question behind the scenes. You're pursuing a question in real time, like what's going on with these traumatized children, and is PTSD really contagious? That's the question in the back of the mind of the narrative that I just referred to. You're pursuing that question, and you're telling the reader the story of how you pursued that story in real time. In this case, the writer went and lived with this family of this highly traumatized Iraqi veteran. She went to school with the mother. They picked up the little girl, and she began, and the mother clearly believes that the little girl is picking up symptoms from her father. She says she mirrors her father. So the writer is putting together the pieces in real time and taking us with her as she recreates her own journey of asking this question: could PTSD be contagious? She introduces real people, placement in active scenes, we're watching them like watching a movie, use of telling details that often wind up performing as metaphors or symbols of the larger issue. But, you know, what would be a telling detail from what we just read? Well, what we just said, when we first see the little girl, it says with I think it said something like with a wide face, just like her daddy's. You know, well, they're just, that's not a particularly profound one, but it certainly right away suggests that this is her father's daughter. And why was that mentioned if it wasn't trying to say that to us?
Can I jump in on details just real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, just it's really, I mean, that's always something that that Clay also, I still remember very clearly, but Clay always would say, you know, don't have any insignificant detail.
No insignificant details.
Yeah, and so
if it's there, it means it's got to be there because it means something.
Yeah, that goes down to everything. So I mean, that's really a great, you know, great one you picked up there because there wasn't clear reasoning behind putting that in there. So it's you know, and that's beautiful. Once you can write with significant detail and every word is semantically laden, then you've got something that can do something. And so it's really wonderful to hear you talking about Clay's descriptions of narrative.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just editing something, and the writer was writing about a person who's a very inspiring teacher. And in describing this teacher, she described his soft blue eyes. She's describing him. He said he has soft blue eyes. And in editing it, I changed soft to clear. Because I just thought, well, soft isn't telling us, what she's telling us about this teacher is not that he's nice and gentle and kind. What she's telling us is that he's very inspiring and illuminating in what he says. So simply changing the word soft to clear was echoing more what kind of message the writer was trying to give us. In another article that I might be editing, if she was writing about a different kind of personality, I might change clear to soft. But every single detail is significant. This kind of writing has no pretense of objectivity. You are definitely, you know, you're forming opinions as you explore reality. You're taking the reader along with you. Hopefully you, the narrator, are reasonably objective. Certainly you must be accurate. You're doing your best intellectual job, you know, and you're a worthy, trustworthy narrator. But you're forming opinions and you're taking the person along with you, and in so doing, you're employing metaphors and symbols to help shape their experience in the way that you want it to be shaped. Strong use of quotes and dialogue, development, a development of suspense, which is an extremely important technique that comes out of fiction and cinema. Certainly narrative journalists have learned a lot from the movies. And there are ways of developing suspense. And roundedness, you know, because Clay here, in his card, he goes shape with beginning, middle, and end, but he doesn't say why. It sounds so obvious. It sounds either obvious or unnecessary to say that. And I think the reason is that you're creating a work of art. And a work of art has got a roundedness to it. There's nothing in it that isn't intrinsic to it. There's nothing in it that doesn't contribute to the whole. In some ways, the end is in the beginning. The end reflects the beginning. When you finish, you feel the satisfaction of having accomplished the reading of a complex and complete work of art and work of thought. Nothing, you know, hopefully nothing or almost nothing is left hanging and incomplete. It's been entertaining as well as educating. I mean, that's where we really depart from the standards of what academics say, you know, about their goal, that they never say that their goal is to entertain, but we do, as well as to educate, because we don't think we can keep you with us if we don't entertain you. And then I think, you know, in something like the kind of work we're talking about, you have started with a question, you're ending with new questions. You've educated the reader, and you've raised new questions, the unanswered questions that might open the door to the next chapter or the next article. So those are some of the elements of narrative writing. I see a question.
Sorry, yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you will get to this later on, but I'm wondering if you can how may you best draft a narrative story from a systems perspective, like a system change perspective? And I don't know how you can.
Let's talk about that. That's a great question. We're going till 7:30, right?
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, we should go to discussion and Q&A, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let me race through what else I have here. What's my next item? This is all being emailed to you anyway, but. Can you go down or look at the next thing, whatever it might be? Oh yeah, satire. Well, I was just having fun. There are a lot of other approaches. You know, I think you can use a beat about children or families or foster care or dads or single mothers or any ethnic community you want to select and immerse yourself in. You can take a beat like that and blog about it or write about it in a narrative way or in a non-narrative way. Narrative is only one technique. You can do an advice column. You can do many other things. But you can also use those things to touch on so many other subjects, you know, child workers, and child trafficking and many other subjects that can wind up coming into a beat like that because you can find the angle that suits that rubric. But satire, I just, this is, do you want to click on that? This is a little piece that Mother Jones did, and it went by kind of too fast, that about the fact, go down to the NPR part, that about the fact that NPR won't use the term child abuse. They consider it too, and they're actually using the term enhanced parenting techniques. And so it was, you know, Mother Jones did a little blog post about, you know, kind of taking issue with the NPR ombudsman. And I just thought, this is just a kind of, you know, if you were blogging about, had any one of those kinds of beats and you were blogging about child maltreatment, it would be so much fun to just play with it and satirize that kind of thing. You know, satirizing bureaucracy, satirizing the media, other people in the media, you know, is kind of a fun way to get conversation and discussion going and draw people to you. So it's just one more thing. So anyway, so those are just some little discussion points, and I just want you to realize that you don't have to be always writing. You don't have to always be writing hard-to-read policy pieces. You can do those, and then you can think about how to be imaginative and take it a step further and recraft it, repurpose it, all that hard work into something that is more popular and that helps to get research and policy into the public, with the idea that an educated public ultimately also helps in turn to drive policy. And it can make a difference. And it can make a difference in somebody's parenting that day. So just a few ideas to start the discussion going.
What about, I think if you could get to Naomi's question, that'd be great. About how do we write a narrative story that describes the system?
Well, give me a little bit more of an example of what do you mean by a systems approach? Or what was the term you used? What did you say, systems something?
Yeah, like a systems change or like a systems approach.
What's a systems approach?
For example, like we've been focusing on policy and a little bit more research, so our stories have been, well, at least my stories have been really broad. So say, for example, you're focusing on D-Link.
On what?
On D-Link or changing like the funding of social welfare, or for example, changing like the evaluation system of the social welfare. So how exactly would you come back and put that into a narrative story and integrate that, if at all possible?
You've got to find the people that are at the root, whose life is at stake, whose life will be changed, who is passionate. Sometimes you find who's passionate about changing something or about keeping something from being changed. who, really, at the end of the day, when we're talking about policy and facts and research, what people are going to be affected, and what do they have to say about it? And you know, academics think of those as using examples, or like a few little color or a few examples. But in narrative journalism, it's about giving them a lot more presence.
I mean, Rishi had also like an interesting take on that, which was, you know, why don't you say what your idea was around that? And it also lends itself to satire around this dealing question too.
Well, I don't know if this is my idea, and you kind of inspired it, but it was the idea, so say, I mean, you're talking about the very broad issue, like, you know, foster care funding at the federal level. If, say, you could find two children, one of which has been receiving federal funding, one of which is not, and compare them and say, on any inherent level, what is the difference between these two children? I mean, they both might have suffered from abuse and neglect. They both have entered foster care. Why does the federal government think that this one is deserving of money and this one's not? And if we can't come up with a good answer, I think that's a good story. I think, and that's what I want to now try to write about, is like, okay, you gotta find that story. I think that's the next step, is to go do that. But yeah, I think tying into what you're saying, you have to find that the human face to these broader ideas, because at the end of the day, the great thing about these stories is that they're impacting people, right? They're impacting vulnerable. That's not a great thing, but I mean, in terms of what makes this powerful, what makes this important, is that it's impacting real people that need help. So
I think we started talking about with Noah and his Head Start story. Like, when I was doing stories, the first thing I thought about was what would be my best interview. When he said Head Start being canceled because of sequestration, I was like, I want to find a single mom who depends on, you know, Head Start to drop her kid off because she can't move for babysitting, and she's hoping that that little pre-K education will start putting their kid on a lifetime of better education and take them out of the same economic struggles that, you know, they go through as a family. Something that you'd really want to look at a character that, wow, this is why Head Start is so important, because it's not just 1 year. It legitimately could put them on a new track for going to high school for the first time, you know, being the first one in their generation that goes to college. Like, that first year makes a huge impact on their educational track going forward.
So I'm all for the people in the journalism aspect, but I think we do need to be careful when we pick characters that we don't just go out and find a token person and talk to them and say, you represent the story that I'm writing, therefore I'm going to use you as my vehicle. Like, I think we do need to be careful that we're picking exemplars and not just examples of the issue that we're writing about, because I think the reader sometimes can see right through it and be like, you just found a character. Like, here's another story where you found me Tom Smith who has this happening to him. Like, I think it happens a lot in health journalism too.
Yeah.
And you just have to be careful.
Yeah.
Like, I think it can be really effective, but I think you need to make sure that you do enough research.
In a strong narrative that's about something like policy, you're interweaving the story with the exposition. And this story, this Mother Jones story, not this one, the Mother Jones story, actually is filled with facts and research. What I read to you was a kind of a narrative bridge. That when you read the whole story, I think you would be convinced that this was a good example of the problem that she's talking about. But I know precisely what you mean, and that's, you know, that's a misuse of
We get lazy sometimes.
What?
We get lazy sometimes, and it kind
Well,
of.
Yeah, there are dangers, of course, to it, because I think the biggest danger is bias. You know, that people bring their biases and they think they're being objective, but they're actually being incredibly biased, and they pick an example that reflects their own prejudices, and they write a story that can, you know, get way off track.
Or crazy things can happen in the inverse. I mean, I once was kind of sold a story by a lawyer who was representing a woman who had kind of thought that there was a conspiracy to say that mold was not dangerous. and then she was getting a defamation suit from this company because she had been going after the guy who had said that mold was not dangerous in this scientifically reviewed paper, and so she thought there was a big conspiracy by who knows who. And so then of course I went and did my investigation. I thought she was going to be the heroine whose daughter had been through cystic fibrosis and all the rest. But when I researched it, she was crazy. I mean, literally, like, you know, she thought she had a messianic mission to rid the world of mold. And I wrote this story about that, so the character, it became completely different from what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to have a character who's going to defeat these bad insurance companies, but really I had a very sad character, and it turned out to be quite a sad story. So it can go either way.
One of the better stories that I've read about problems with medical policy was the Time magazine cover piece, I think 2 weeks ago, about healthcare bills and the real cost of healthcare. And the way they went into...
Oh, the Stephen Brill story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way they went into it is they just had this person who found out they had this life-threatening disease and they had to be flown into a special center, and just started putting you in their, kind of in their kitchen with how they're going to pay for things. Talked about how they had to call their mom to ask for money, how they got to the center and how long they had to stay there. And then it started bringing you into the problems with medical billing, because it took you step by step and line by line through their receipt. And then it started exposing, you know, the differences in healthcare and why university medical centers are like big business now compared to other countries, and how different things of what the medical definition is and what it really is if it's given to you at a Walgreens and not a hospital. And so it started going into like policy that way, but just introducing the characters as a way to kind of usher us into the denser stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. So the good news is that this is really interesting and fun way of writing, and the bad news is that you have to do this in addition to all the other research and writing that you also have to do. So it's actually extra work.
It seems like a lot of the narrative journalism that I've read, like I love stuff from the New Yorker and stuff like that, there's always name changes to the main characters, and we've been talking about the sort of ethical concerns about using juvenile names, but it seems like I mean, at least from what the small sort of subset of articles that I read on a regular basis, it seems totally normal to change names. So what do you think about that?
I don't think the New Yorker does that much, actually, but they do it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that common. I think that it's a practice, it's a perfectly fine practice, and the defense of it is that in most reputable outlets, the writer discloses the real name to the editor, and all the fact-checking is done with the real person. There have been exposés at the New Yorker. I mean, that's why the New Yorker doesn't do this so much anymore, because they've gotten in trouble for doing it in the past, for having composite characters. It used to be much more of a practice. It used to be much more common for journalists to create composite characters. That's considered completely taboo now. So it's a real person. It's just got the name changed, and you know, the credibility of the editor and the magazine or newspaper rests on the fact that it is true.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about finding a good character and what makes a good character, and how characters really help illustrate the point or the issue that you're exploring in a narrative.
Yeah, it's a big trick to, you know, doing this well is finding a good character, because the character, Larry Wright, who just wrote the book Going Clear on Scientology, is a wonderful journalist and playwright, the author of Fallaci, which is playing in the Berkeley Rep right now, which I highly recommend. But he calls his main character a donkey, meaning that it carries the story. You know, you load the story into the donkey's saddlebags, basically. The character is doing all this work for you, carrying the story through scene after scene. You know, what makes a good character is that the person, you know, really is a good example of the situation you're exploring, and that you can actually be with watch that character go through some scenes and you know, the character's willing to let you be with him or her in some active situations. And you know that you're a good interviewer and you can bring the person out and get them to talk. In many social welfare, by the way, I have a degree in social welfare too. I have an MSW, and I have a strong interest in child welfare. I mean, I'm not certified in California, and I don't practice in social work in any way, but except on the board of a child welfare nonprofit. But you know, I do know a lot about the ethics of the field, and you know, social workers cannot talk to you about their cases, and lawyers can't. And there's a lot of ways in which it makes it very hard for journalists. Much as social workers kind of wish you could write about some of these things, they can't help you. So, you know, a way around that is if you can get to the actual people, otherwise known as clients. I mean, again, you know, we just have this one example in front of our faces, this PTSD story, but here, you know, she's talking to the mother and the child, and the mother herself is comfortable with the diagnosis of that her husband has PTSD. She's comfortable with saying that her daughter has caught it or is mirroring it. She's comfortable with talking about whether she will or will not take her daughter in to see a psychiatrist. She's comfortable with talking about what she's doing to try to help her husband and her daughter. They're all comfortable with it. They all sign off on it. So the writer was able to wrap that. And you've used characters who've been willing to talk to you. And in the chapters that we all just read from Jill's work, you use them very well. You get things that you could not have gotten from any of the professionals who they treat. So you run the risk that Brittany brought up, and I think it's a really important caution. Journalists can, you know, definitely abuse their power, but I do think that what you need to do is kind of go around the professionals and get to the people themselves.
Just on that note, I'm curious, so what if, because being in the social welfare program and having had certain positions that I no longer hold, like I know about lots of clients and I'm no longer professionally obligated to them, but wouldn't it be a little blurry if I know where they hang out? Let's say I want to do a story on the Hate Street kids. I know about a ton of them. I know where their hangouts are and what happens where. And I use my former knowledge of what my job gave me to then access them. Is that unethical?
No, it depends on.
I mean, I don't know what Jill would say. I mean, there's two distinctions of ethics, right? So I mean, you know also the MSW side.
I mean, I'm like, is that unethical?
It depends. But there are ethical principles that you can use to test what you're doing and to make sure that you're on the ethical right side of the street.
Which are?
I thought you were going to address
No. I don't know what they are in this context of having taken information from a previous life.
You shouldn't. If just changing somebody's name is sometimes not enough if they're recognizable among their peers, and you know, so sometimes you need to get their permission, you know, and say, Joe, I'm writing about you, but I'm going to change your name, you know, to David, and are you comfortable with that? And sometimes you can change identifying details, and you say that, you know, you disclose that I've changed names and identifying details have been changed, you know, so suddenly he has a different hair color and he's a different height and things like that, and he's just not recognizable. So if you think that you're endangering somebody or you're compromising your own professional ethics by making them recognizable in their own context, you protect them.
Taking it back to your first point of just because you know where they are, like I don't see that as unethical and going back to that place and saying, hey, I'm doing a story, can you do it? Because they still have a choice at that moment to talk to or not. And it would be kind of the same as if you knew a reporter that was doing a story and you're like, well, I can't tell you exactly details, but you know, if you're looking for people that might want to talk to you, there's this basketball court at this park, and you can do the asking yourself. You know, a lot of the times when I was doing stories, you might have been, when you're talking to police officers that don't want to like tell you specific things, they'll give you hints. Let's say there's this, you know, downtown park that there's a lot of drugs being sold in the middle of the day, and if you just happen to be there, then you might have a story.
But hers is more complicated because of her previous role. I mean, that's because it's different than sort of just using an informant, being a journalist, using an informant, and then going to the place. Sort of, I think that yours is much more complicated.
I just think because like, so I currently still know people that work at my last place of employment, and I know when they talk about clients sometimes, they don't name them, I don't ask, because I feel like I no longer have that privilege. So I think it would just concern me, let's say I did a story, and I did work with a character that I knew because of my last job, and then even with the de-identifying details, it was somehow linked up that because I had worked at Welcome Street, I had that knowledge and then produced that story. It still feels, I mean, I think I could probably find my way around it, but I think organizations don't care how you get creative. I think they'd be like, oh, you used your knowledge when you were here, and they have this whole idea like once a client, always a client. So I think that's just, because it's like this double back, because I have like this privilege of knowing about certain people and experiences, but then I have this issue of needing to protect them still, even though I no longer quote unquote serve them. But,
I don't know what the answer is on what would you do, Jill, in that situation?
Probably just be careful. I mean, as you are, right? You're just sort of laying out what the issues are. I would go to the NSW Code of Ethics and sort of go through the checklist. If I do this, am I good? If I do this, am I good? I'd make sure that there was a lot, that you were clear about informed consent with that individual. Make sure that given their circumstances, because who knows what, I don't know what circumstances are, they have the capacity to consent and they understand they have free will. And there are questions raised about people's free will, you know, when you're either on the street or homeless or destitute in some way. It definitely raises questions about your capacities. So I just sort of go through all of those most thoughtfully.
If I could just add one thing to that, I think that conflict of interest exists with journalists as well, because I wouldn't feel comfortable like profiling someone that I know professionally, that I knew, you know, in another profession, or like a family member, because that muddies the grounds of objectivity. And so I think using the connections and using the information that you have to find a source would be a safe option, whereas you're not like, you know, digging in your own back door. You can just use your knowledge to say, okay, here's a way that I could get someone, and then that way I don't already know things about them that, you know, they might not want to reveal, and it just kind of keeps things a little bit more direct and kind of avoids that issue of cross-pollination. And I think, like, as journalists on the whole, we kind of have to do that and say, you know, well, I can't cover this story. Somebody else might be able to, but it's too close to home.
Something I run into a lot in narrative writing is sort of like understanding that the story is going to end up evolving a lot, and like sort of what you were talking about, almost like guiding itself as I continue to do things and having sort of sub-stories emerging that I didn't even necessarily anticipate. But I've never really dealt with it in the capacity of doing narrative writing and policy, where like there might not be space for the story to evolve in this certain way, and I want to follow this other story that, you know, is basically like the main policy thing. So I was just wondering, like, when is it okay to maybe drop the narrative thing in policy writing if it's not relevant, and just sort of do like a drier policy story? And is there still space to explore like the evolution of a policy narrative story?
Well, I mean, I guess it gets back to the character. If the character lives a life or lives a moment that exemplifies the policy question we're talking about, that, you know, for example, is it that top pyramid, that 6 to 8% that's very hard to, you know, there's probably a million, not a million, there's not a million cases, which is your point. But there's, you know, there are some of those cases where you can see the dysfunction and how deep that is and how hard it is to really stop this cycle from happening. But the timelines we have don't necessarily allow us to get a front, middle, you know, beginning, middle, and end that will tell us that whole story. So that being said, I mean, there's no way to be prescriptive about people's lives, and there's no way for us to say, well, you know, if your story doesn't live up to the policy example we're trying to make, then we're not going to use it, or, you know, maybe we won't use it. But you know, I don't know how to really. I don't want you to try to cram the narrative around a policy thing. And in terms of your next assignment, if the narrative runs beyond, outside of the realm of the policy, and the narrative is that interesting, that's okay.
Well, I think sometimes, like as a journalist or a writer, I envision like the perfect character that would guide this story, which is like constructive and not constructive, because sometimes you don't get that character, and then you're sort of like trying to almost create a sub-narrative.
A stubborn donkey who goes off into the wrong field or stops moving.
Yeah, and I think especially with something like this, like I haven't dealt with, child maltreatment and foster care in this context, so I'm just not sure, I'm going to happen upon that character that really.
No, and a lot of it is luck.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about, what kind of the ideal of great long form. First of all, you need a lot of space to make this all happen. You have the narrative, and you also have exposition. And it takes luck to have a good character, go with them on these scenes and have everything fall into place and answer your question. I'm kind of describing the goal. But, you can then chip off bits and pieces of it, I think. If you sort of understand what a beautiful, well-constructed, successful narrative, long-form narrative is, then you can back away from that and take bits and pieces of it. And sometimes, it's just going to be an example. It's going to be a great quote. It's going to be that you're able to use some description in a nice metaphorical way. You can, you also just are going to write exposition, plain old exposition. You're going to describe the facts. There still are ways to write more powerfully and less dryly. You can use active voice, and you can use vary your sentences, and you can use more, you can avoid cliches, and there's still a lot of things you can do to make it be good writing. To come back to what we were really talking about, the subject matter, having a different beat. A beat that's popular writing, that attracts readers, and that translates some policy from where we have a lot of evidence about what people can do to have more positive parenting and growing up experiences. And popularizing that information. And that happens by getting the information out. Just getting the information out, and it comes from packaging that information in a way that's really interesting and fun to read for people. But there are other things. I don't want to make it seem as though it's all narrative or nothing. The advice columns are a great way to do it. There's a market for advice columns. So, there are many, many ways of approaching this. I'm just really here to advocate that you free yourselves up a little bit and enjoy the writing and borrow a variety of techniques from narrative journalism and even from fiction, and be imaginative and creative and find ways to reconnect the people who are at the heart of these issues with the people who want to read your stories, and connect them heart to heart.
I am very excited about the narrative part, because that was my favorite type of story for policy implications, because you really put a human element on something that people just read dryly. And it makes me think kind of, Daniel, what you did last year with someone aging out of foster care and getting ready to go to school. And we started tackling, who's Contra Costa County?
David Colby.
David Colby. So with David, he was just this great, main character for the story. Aging out of foster care on his birthday, being told that even though he's getting ready to go to Cal and graduate high school, he is not going to have any assistance for housing or whatever. So this guy has a bright future, but the present seems kind of mysterious and dark, in that how's he going to get from his birthday to when he gets to go to Cal? And then you take it to a policy issue, and you could talk about legislation, why there's a problem with legislation. And we broke it up kind of in different ways, and that we did a very policy-heavy one, but if we want to do a real long form, we would have just had a narrative intro that talks about our character, his situation, kind of the problem that's going on, and that he's losing funding for his house, his services, he doesn't have time to get to Cal yet, so there's a real uncertainty for him, and he's going through this courtroom decision on, is he going to have funding or is he not going to have funding. You could stop right there and then intro the policy aspect of it, of why are there going to be thousands of kids like David in California not getting any funding after they turn 18. And then you could go into legislative battles and why the funding got cut off because of politics between opposing parties, and they don't want to fund a year of foster care or as a whole. And then you could close it off by the conclusion, what's going to happen, that Sacramento legislators are trying to push emergency bills right now to make sure kids like David are going to get funding for their birthdays so that they don't be in this gap year position, and that kind of leads into what's going to happen next if you haven't had legislation settle itself in the uncertainty. But it seems like you're kind of tying a nice bow on it by putting it in the middle after you've had a reader invested, like themselves, in a character. And this might be something like investing in the character is the way I get people to really concern themselves on a policy issue. And so if you have a character that they're like, wow, I can't believe this is happening, they're more apt to read why the policy itself is a bad policy or why they need changes. And then they're like, well, what happened to my character? And come back out of the policy, nitty-gritty, and then here's the character in their current fight.
Yeah, I mean, without David Colby, we wouldn't. I mean, that gave the story the legs it needed for this chronicle to fall over the Chronicle of the Times, the San Jose Mercury News, KPIX, KGO, everybody. And that's what got not the emergency legislation, but the governor's office to find some money in their budget to rectify the situation for David and 2,188 other foster youth on the funding bubble that he found himself in. So there is opportunity to use narrative to affect the lives of kids, for sure.
Just think about how uninteresting that story would be to most people if there wasn't a character like David.
Yeah.
An 18-year-old that's going to Cal.
Our brains are constructed, that it's hard to care about 1,000 abused kids, but it's easy to care about one abused kid if you hear her story. And it's something about our brains, and our mirror neurons, and we feel empathy for another human being, and we identify with that person, we can visualize it, we can feel it, and we're off. We're captured, and then you can wrap the pill of the policy statistics, inside that more palatable shell. Pure manipulation.
Before we go, Deirdre, I have a question that maybe could help some of our students out, because they are getting to that stage where they have to ask people for interviews, and maybe the people that are going to be asked are more hesitant. So what is kind of a good way to ease people's concerns if you're explaining to them, you're doing a story, and obviously it's going to be different for everyone, but any tips you could give on to our new journalists for getting people to be at ease with you as a journalist?
First impressions are everything. So, looking as though you are confident and you're a trustworthy person and you're projecting that, and that you're communicative and you're open to having all the conversation they want about what you're going to do with their information, how you're going to treat it, that you're friendly and responsible and conversational about it. And if people get that feeling from you, they will usually take the first few steps. I often use phrases like, I'd like to talk to you about this with, no commitment whatsoever on your part. Just wanted to ask you if you would be willing to, talk to me for a little bit. And then after we've talked for a while, I'd say, gee, that's been so interesting. I really wonder if I could take it the next step, and would you be willing to, talk to me for my story? And I try to avoid using words like on the record, right away. And then a little bit later I might say, so, okay, now I'm going to turn on my tape recorder, and then what we say is all going to be on the record, but if you want me to stop my tape recorder at any time you want to go off the record, that's fine with me, Then they might say something really great off the record, and then you write that down, or you take that too, and then you might come back and you say, you said something to me off the record, and I completely respect that, but it was so good, I really was wishing you had put it on the record, and I was wondering if there was a way in which you could put it on the record. And it's a negotiation, and it's a process. So I think that if you let them know that it's going to be like that from the beginning. This is going to be a relationship, you know, which it's not like you're pulling the trigger and then, you know, suddenly I've got the power to destroy you. No, you know, trust me, we're going to do this together. And then they usually will.